I said thank you, but I need 1 second. Let's see. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Good morning and good afternoon. We're excited to be here. I've gotten through the most difficult part of the presentation, which is the tech part. Before we get going, I would love everyone, if they don't mind, to drop into the chat their names and the schools they're with, just so that we all have an idea of who's on the line and that good news. And then also, we have a quick poll to start.
I'm sorry, Tricia, really quick. I actually am unable to see your screen.
Oh.
I know Deborah said that she could, but I cannot.
Okay, let's see. Presenter view. I'm in presenter. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Share screen. Sharing screen. All right. How about now?
We're good to go, but I don't see it at there. I don't see it as slideshow mode.
How about now?
If you could switch your views, because I see it in presenter view now.
I'm not sure what you're saying to me, and I apologize because apparently the tech part isn't over yet. What are you looking for me to do, Brittany?
So at the top where it says swap displays, you'll press that. There you go. Perfect.
Like I said. Anyway, thank you for bearing with us as we get that done. I've asked y'all if you wouldn't mind to drop your name in, but also we have a quick poll about what concerns you most about distance learning. I think there are probably folks on the line, and you might want to let us know in the chat, are getting ready to go back into full distance learning. And so what is it that concerns you most? Student engagement, student proficiency, parent partnerships, technology issues, or anything else that might be going on? So I'll let you take a second to do that. And while you're doing that, I'll let you know, today we're going to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do, transition to distance learning, the impacts of stress and uncertainty, and then lessons we've learned. I know you're all here and intentionally at the RAPSA conference. What I want to remind us all as we're getting ready to get into this session is that RAPSA is focused on helping educators working with at-risk students, and by identifying students as at promise. The organization emphasizes the belief that despite obstacles, all students can succeed, and I just think that's lovely. All right, so I'm sorry. We're joined today, and I'm honored to have Dr. Ramona Bishop be a co-presenter. She is the co-founder and CEO of Elite Public Schools. I'm going to let her introduce herself and then her schools in just a moment. I wanted to let you know again that my name is Tricia Blum, and I'm the Vice President of Business Services at Charter School Capital. Prior to joining Charter School Capital about 3.5 years ago, I worked as a client with Charter School Capital to turn around a campus. I was the CEO of a 5-campus charter school in Los Angeles, which is where I'm based out of. And prior to that, I was a transactional lawyer. So I'm excited to be in the charter industry for the last 8 years and to be with Charter School Capital for the last 3.5. Dr. Bishop, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and then about Elite, that'd be great.
Thank you, Tricia, and it's an honor to be co-presenting with you this morning. I'm Dr. Ramona Bishop. I am the president and CEO and also co-founder of Elite Public Schools, which is a brand new charter school. It opened on last year. Before that, I am a career educator. I've been an educator over 20 years. I started as a teacher. That was my best and favorite job. I then became a principal for quite an extended period of my career, and then moved into the central office where I was a director and associate superintendent, as well as a superintendent of 2 urban school districts. So I'm so glad to see each of you this Friday. It's Friday and you're still here. So we hope that this will be meaningful to you. Thank you.
All right. And so tell us a little bit about Elite, please.
Absolutely. So Elite, again, we started last academic year. That was our very first year of operation. We opened with a little over 400 students. So for those of you who have planted schools, you know that was a huge undertaking. Our school is uniquely designed to eliminate the opportunity gap for historically underserved students. And we name and call out our African American students, our Latinx students, and students who are on free and reduced lunch. ELITE stands for, if you'll go back, it stands for Equipping Leaders Through Innovation, Technology, and Engineering. Looking forward to the future, what will our students need in order to be successful? And so we feel that they will need not only to be very proficient in English, but also to be very proficient in Spanish and very proficient in coding, or the language of the computer. And this is how we get there, through entrepreneurial skill development. We want our young people to not only think about where they are going to work, but job creation, being their own bosses. Language development, again, in English and Spanish. We have a dual immersion pathway. So whereas all of our students learn Spanish, some of them are learning in Spanish through dual immersion. And then we have our African American and Latinx cultural heritage program.
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Again, we are intentionally created to address the needs of the students that RAPSA cares about, right? So RAPSA has said we're calling our students at-promise students. So each one of you have within your school context students that need more of our care in order to be successful. For us, this looks like African American, Latinx, homeless students, and foster youth. And certainly our school population and demographic consists of about 80% free and reduced lunch students. We want to make sure, you know, my career is really rooted. I decided I was going to be an educator when I was 8 years old, actually. Although people tried to talk me out of it, I made that decision because I was bused and integrated into a school where I had educators that weren't quite ready for this thing called integration and this thing called educating all students. And therefore, at that time, I decided I'm going to be a teacher, and I'm going to be the kind of teacher that loves and cares for all of our students, but also holds all of our students accountable for their learning. That holds very high expectations for students, no matter what zip code they come from, what language they speak, what their special abilities are, or of course, their country of origin.
Right. I think that's so incredibly important. Thank you for founding that school. A little bit about Charter School Capital. We've been in business for about 13 years now, and our whole mission is to support schools access, leverage, and sustain the resources that they need to thrive. And we want to enable schools to really focus on what matters most, which is educating the students. We've served more than 1.2 million students since we've opened, and we've supported over 700 schools with more than $2 billion investment dollars. And again, we are here to support the schools and help them thrive. Quickly about Charter School Capital on a personal note, because we aren't a big bad finance company only, we actually have 52 students of our own to remind us of why, 29 fur babies between us to keep us sane. We have some fish and birds too, so I won't leave them out. And while finance and education are a huge part of our background, it's not the only part of our organization. We have people that have art background or biology backgrounds. So it's a group of people coming together to really further the core mission and help students thrive. And Dr. Bishop?
I have to add my children. I have 4 girls. I may not look like it. I know I only look 29, but I have 3 grandchildren. And additionally, I think as we move into this section, Brittany, I want to just say as a career educator, I've always thought about my girls as I've done my work. right? So my girls have attended schools where I was principal. My girls have attended districts where I was assistant superintendent. And so as I think about this work, I'm always thinking about, would I put my own child in this classroom? Would I put my own child in this school? I know student engagement is on all of our minds, and it appears that within the poll, student engagement is what is critical. So I want to talk a little bit about that as we transition into this conversation about distance learning. And I want to be clear, as educators, we must consider distance learning, not homeschooling, because our parents are thinking, because of some of the work that they're now doing, that they are homeschooling. No, as educators, we want to really hold that distance learning space to make sure that our students are actually engaged and actually moving along the trajectory toward proficiency. So all of you know, I mean, you could probably tell this story about last year in March, that we got news on Thursday that we needed to close by Monday. And again, I told you all that we were brand new, so we had about 400 students, but we hadn't even purchased nor distributed all of our technology yet. Although our goal was to be one-on-one, it wasn't necessarily to be one-on-one in the first year of operation. Therefore, we had to think, okay, let's see, we're not going to see our students on Monday. What on earth are we going to do? That was a rocky transition for us. It ended in us creating paper packets for our young people, and they were 2-week packets with a once a week or twice a week Zoom check-in, depending on the teacher, and us trying to get as much technology out as we could. We were communicating via email, Pony, whatever way that we could communicate with parents, we were. We ended up doing a lot of home visits because, there are circumstances that caused our parents not to be able to come out and come to our school. So it was huge for us. Poverty played a huge role in our transition. And if we're really about the business of educating and engaging all students, the conversation with our teachers was, how are we remaining connected with these young people throughout the time? And so we struggled with that challenge, and I'll talk with you a little bit more about that as well.
So I think one of the interesting things that, and you may be sharing it later, is that you hadn't realized initially about when you were offering drive-through pickup, that not all of your students' families even had automobiles, so that was even a challenge.
That was certainly a challenge, to just assume things, right? We have to make sure that our assumptions do not eliminate someone from something. And so we did, go to the drive-through, pick up your curriculum, pick up your packet model. And we found out that some of our families were not even able to do that. So we had to create spaces for walk-up, and we did some home delivery, as I mentioned before. As we moved into the thoughts for this year and during the summer, and again, many of you have probably done some of this. I hope that I'm just spurring additional thoughts in your mind about things you might do. We then started to have conversations with our parents because, as you know, lots of uncertainty was circling in our world. And so we, when we were talking with our parents, we found out that, first of all, these every 2-week distribution periods, this was an opportunity for our students and families to see us, to actually connect now in ways that they weren't able to connect with the world outside in some cases. So we really saw how important it is, the role of the educator as a light during this difficult and uncertain time was very, very important. So if you are an administrator or you are a teacher, I would encourage you to continue to think about ways in which your engagement with parents and families is really about the business of encouraging and being a support and asking the right questions and perhaps responding in ways that help the families know, I'm really, really here for you. And we found, of course, that our technology was very lacking. And, you know, to give a computer when a family doesn't have Wi-Fi does absolutely no good. So we really had to go back to the drawing board, think about how can we get some of these Wi-Fi hotspots? Where do they reside? And then how can we, in some cases, pay that monthly cost so that our young people had access and continue to have access to this day. We also heard from our parents that student support was critical, right? Again, that not only student support in the way of socio-emotional kind of check-in, but also student support in the way of intervention and support at home. Our parents, again, became teachers toward the end of the year. That is not distance learning, that's homeschooling. And so we had to make sure that our young people had ways, if they didn't understand what was going on in the packets, if they don't understand what's going on Zoom, and I'm going to talk about our Zoom schedule in a moment, how is it that they can get the help that they need? Remembering that in communities to say, ask your mom, ask your dad, when perhaps the educational system has failed mom or dad, causes unnecessary and undue burden on these kids that RAPSA and all of us care about. And so we really had to think about how we structured our day so that we were creating intervention spaces. We were creating spaces for our English learner students. We were creating one-on-ones. And of course, that we were keeping in mind the IEPs that we have for our special ed students. So again, the families in these conversations, this did not come from us necessarily. It was them asking us to be more intentional around small group support for young people. Yes, educational services, and yes, mental health services as well in some cases.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has certainly shown us that school, whether it's in person or distance, is and can be a sanctuary. And I think you've done a phenomenal job, Dr. Bishop, in making it such.
Thank you.
A little bit about staff.
Absolutely. And going back to that, Tricia, for the educators on this, if you haven't read about full service community schools, or even going back to some of the Healthy Start programs that we had in California, there's some really rich and robust research around school being that hub for certainty for many of our young people, even in the absence of a pandemic, even in the absence of, you know, us seeing these protests and the racial unrest that's going on. Schools must be a hub for young people if we're truly about the business of educating every young person. Also, what we found out, of course, is that, I shouldn't say of course, as we kind of look back and we're thinking about how we best serve our students, what we found is something that I've found in other spaces, and that is that when an adult is traumatized, we must work with that adult first before that adult can be healthy for young people. And so you all have read the ACEs study out of Kaiser in San Diego, where they really dug into this notion that if a parent, or correction, if an adult or a parent or any adult that's grown up has had certain things happen in their life as a child, then that on the flip side will cause them to have some difficulty in their adult life, whether it's around abuse issues or all kinds of things pop up when young people have not had a healthy environment as they grew up or have experienced certain things as they grew up. So our teachers are not absent from that. I'm not absent from that. Our admin are not absent. Our classified are not absent. So we had to really make sure that as we were servicing students and as we continue to service students, that the adult needs are met. These check-ins are serious and critical. I call teachers, probably 1 to 2 teachers per night, just to check in for them to talk with me about things that they otherwise would not say in a staff meeting. Our connections to the adults in our space spaces are very important. And if you're a teacher, your connections with your colleagues are very important. If you feel like someone is going negative, it's really important to just encourage them at this time. We really need to be encouraging one another. Another thing that occurred, and Brittany, we talked about this, Tricia, with regard to, I was thinking of Brittany because she asked a question about this, but we talked about as a dual immersion piece. We have families that are proactive in realizing my child, even if I don't know Spanish, my child is going to learn in Spanish in that dual immersion program. So add the fact that the instruction is in Spanish, all of the work is in Spanish, but mom or dad speaks English. And so we have to make sure to be very intentional around supports for our young people who are in that dual immersion program, even over and above what we're providing for the rest of our young people. Lastly, what I'll say around this is really creating a learning space, not just a space where we're checking in with one another, but we now have time to create these virtual learning spaces. And I really commend RAPSA for doing this conference online. We have spaces now that we can tap into the best practices across the nation and internationally. And we can tap into our own best practices. So learning from one another has become very important in our elite bubble. And our teachers are really stepping up to the plate. Every day I learn something different about some tech wonderfulness that they have found out there that is helping them serve the needs of students. So creating space for that, creating space so that our leaders can share those best practices with one another has been critical to what I'm going to call our success at Elite.
I think the learning space part, both mental, emotional, is also an important piece, and physical for students, right? We need to help the students also create that learning space.
No doubt.
All right. So what did we take away from all of this transition?
It's all about relationships, Tricia. I don't think we've learned anything kind of new here. It's all about relationships and connections. And, you know, I hope that we can make relationships and connections through this conversation that we're having. So I know that Tricia and I welcome your questions within the chat. If you have anything that you want to know more about, please make sure to be in that chat and asking us.
Yes, thank you. And, you know, to the communication piece, Dr. Bishop, I think the fact that you're reaching out to staff, you know, a couple of staff every evening. I know you've also got families that you're reaching out to in your own family. And I think, you know, the amount of energy communication takes right now is a lot, but also it's equally important. And I know that for me, at least, oftentimes just the mere act of reaching out brings me some warmth and connection so that I am feeling that. And I think that's working for teachers and staff and parents and students as well.
Absolutely. I even have some students who have somehow found my cell phone number. So I have students texting me, and I'm not the site principal. So yeah, these connections are very critical to all of us. Absolutely.
They are. They are. So perfect segue. We're going to talk about the impacts of stress and uncertainty during this time. We are certainly in a time of high uncertainty. This particular slide, I feel like we could talk for days about, but there is an incredible amount of uncertainty in our worlds. And when I say our, I'm including our children, students, everyone, right? We've got the pandemic, and that is a stressful time in and of itself. Again, a lot of states are going back into a full lockdown. And so that just seems to keep kind of coming back and giving us more and more. The US elections were stressful for many people. Certainly we've had a resurgence for the search for equality amongst people. Racial injustice and systemic racism have been at the forefront and incredibly important during this time, but it's coupled with the US election and the pandemic and economic turmoil. And that is really impacting everyone, but especially the vulnerable demographics, right? The folks that need support most and may find all of this to be most uncertain. We've really got to spend time supporting them. So we had a really robust conversation, I know, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but one of the things that Dr. Bishop and I have found is that a lot of teachers have had the opportunity to, leverage past events to teach about current events, right? So in no particular order, the protests of the past for today's protests, that's created certainly with my children, and I know in their classrooms, a really robust conversation. Pandemics of the past for today's pandemic. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this, barring the plague way back when, but certainly there have been recent challenges, and it's opened up dialogue and opportunity for teachers to teach biology much differently than they have in the past. And then elections. I know at my son's school, they had a specific, and he's in high school, elections class for the last semester. And that gave them the opportunity to really dialogue with each other. And the electoral college versus the popular vote was very much a conversation in my household, and why we chose to have the electoral college. So I think this is a great opportunity to rethink, rebrand, and strategize so that we can ensure that our students are best served. I think, Dr. Bishop, you have some great examples on this as well.
Yes, just a couple of things. I know that controversial subjects often are difficult for us as educators to navigate with our young people. But it is really important at this time to hear their conversations about things, especially if you are serving the communities about which I spoke earlier. Walking away from a conversation about racial unrest is not really something we want to do. We want to be in that conversation with our young people, answering their questions, not really trying to determine their outcome or to manipulate their thinking, but really opening up spaces where they can have these conversations in a safe space. We have done several things with regard to our curriculum and shifting that curriculum. At the beginning of the year, we did a freedom project throughout the school from transitional kindergarten all the way to 10th grade, where our young people were studying what is freedom, what are fights for freedom, and really wrapping in these conversations around protest, going back to early fights for freedom and understanding those things. And we kicked that off with Dia de la Independencia, just because many of our young people come from Mexico. We also did a teach-in around the presidential election. And initially, Tricia, we thought about just making it at high school or middle school, but we ended up going all the way to TK as well on that teach-in. So we had a teacher who is also an activist and consultant come in and teach our entire school in an auditorium assembly format about elections, electoral college, popular vote, all of those things. And we have heard that first graders were watching CNN, looking at electoral college votes and actually understanding what they were seeing. And we wrapped that particular effort up with our own mock election, which we posted live on Facebook. So these ways, let's get creative around not walking away from these conversations, but walking into them in structured ways that allow for all of our young people to get off what's on their mind. Their families are already having these conversations. Why not have them in a safe space in the classroom? But that safe space has to be created through protocols around talking about these things.
Absolutely. And again, this just is an articulation of ways that educators are finding to be creative in reaching out to their students. And it goes with all of the exciting things that you were doing earlier this year, and that we're going, like you said, we can't shy away from, uncomfortable things. And this year has certainly provided us more than enough uncomfortable things to discuss. So, again, to wrap up what you and I have said, that, create spaces for students to process events and stress, right? And again, I think social and emotional learning right now is so incredibly important. We've thrown around for a long time now this whole self-care idea, but it is really something that we need to help our students understand, and how to help them, not just understand, but learn to process that stress. And like you said, virtual schools should be safe, right? They should be unbiased. And sometimes, you do have to bring in a third party to help navigate in this situation. And we need to get educators and students to think about how they can impact, right? And again, I know at Elite, you have done a lot of work around this, but if you have an example, I'd love to hear it.
I think as we go into the leadership lessons, yes, I can absolutely share some of those examples, no doubt about it.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna do a quick poll, just make sure everyone's still awake. Again, it's not a test, I promise. And we heard earlier that student engagement was what was on your minds most about distance learning. And this one is, what support does your staff need most to be effective during this time? You've heard Dr. Bishop talk about that in detail. Professional development around technology specifically, but also professional development around creating rigorous and innovative course content, time to converse and share with colleagues, and tips for working with parents, or something else altogether. We would love to hear, again, what support you need for your staff during this challenging time. And I'm going to go ahead and move along to leadership lessons. That's going to switch back to Dr. Bishop while you're all letting us know what's most challenging for you.
Wonderful, thank you. And we really, really want to hear from you so we can tailor our comments for the rest of this presentation toward what it is that you need. So with regard to leadership lessons, I think I've learned a lot during this time, and my team and I have learned a great deal. We have learned to continue to step up and step back. Leadership is all throughout your campus. It is all throughout your community. And so listening, even more than we've done before, has been critical to our success. Again, we were a first-year school, so it would have been really easy last year for us to lose a lot of students. We are a school that people select to come into. And so we really had to think about, how are we creating spaces where people feel honored, people feel heard, people feel encouraged. And that leads to the retention of families and students and staff. Even though things are hard in our own families, in our own lives, we have had to be very intentional about motivating and inspiring. And again, that goes back to our own emotional health. So really checking to make sure that we are whole and that we are bringing that wholeness into our conversations with our staff, and or if you're a classroom teacher, with our students. And providing hope. Even when California has gone to a curfew, even when things seem very uncertain, providing hope that, good wins. At the end of the day, there's goodness in people, and it wins out at the end.
I agree. Thank you. When we were talking about this yesterday or the day before, I loved what you said about stepping back when you were talking about the leading a parade.
Yes.
And then also we've gotten a couple, so I'm gonna hit you with three things. Some of the folks listening would like to know some tips with working with parents, which I think I know you can elaborate on, and then tech help with teachers and students. It would be interesting if you've got more to add on that. So
yes, absolutely, I will. Certainly, I can just speak about parents quickly, and then I'll go into the tech help as we continue with these slides. But with regard to our families, truths, even if they're ugly, are very important. So as I shared with you, Tricia, we actually were thinking about reopening on December 1st. And in thinking about that, instead of creating a day, talking with staff, and then opening, we put some truths in front of our families, how we would open, what protocols we would have in place, what would be available as compared to what is available now within the distance learning space, what it would take for us to do all of this. And even putting truths around the numbers of COVID infection in our county in front of our families, and not being married to these plans that we're putting in front of our families. And in doing that, first of all, participation in these Zoom sessions with families has been very high. We have had no less than, 40, 50 families on any given parent Zoom session that we hold, with the exception of the ones that are in Spanish in some cases. But even those are robust. And when we do these and actually get the feedback from the families and then incorporate it into the next presentation, they feel like their voices are heard and they are a part of our decision-making process. That last session, the last two sessions that I spoke with you about, Tricia, we found that although we were putting all these robust plans in place, and they would even go so far as to say, we trust you all implicitly with what you're doing. It sounds fabulous. We would tweak this or that, but it sounds great. When we polled at the end to find out if parents were actually considering bringing their children back even into a hybrid space, which is what we were offering, in one of the sessions, only 10% of the families were even considering it. And in those cases, they were more considering it because they felt like this Zoom and the amount of time that we were online was not benefiting their young people. So we made adjustments for that. But 10%, Tricia, of all of our families were even considering it and still hadn't made a decision. And then in our Spanish speaking groups, zero, no one was considering bringing their children back even to a hybrid space. So I think these conversations are critical, but they have to be honest. Families are going through it. They don't have time for fluff. They want to know, let's hit it and quit it. What is it that you're talking about? Give us the information we need, and then hear us when we say something. And if you really hear us, then your plans will change. So we changed our decision to open December 1st, even before we went back into being on the governor's watch list, based on what we were hearing from families. And I think the other piece around families is once they trust you, they're going to tell you things. And if they tell you things and you don't respond, then shame on us, right, as educators. Specifically, I received an email from one of the families, one of the moms that has just struggled with being unhoused over the last several years. And so I immediately responded to her, connected her with people I know that do that work, and she was housed in the next couple of days. So that kind of a thing, if we're really about the business of every child, let's not just hear these things, but let's respond in ways that let the families know, wow, I really do have a partner at that school. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to do even more of that, because I know educators cannot do it all. We have a lot on our plates, and really our primary responsibility is the academic issues. So I'm going to talk about structures that we're building to support the continued work to respond to these issues.
Right, and I love your responsiveness to families. I think, choice schools especially need to be responsive, but I think in today's uncertain times, it's incredibly important. When I was CEO of charter school, it was less uncertain, thank goodness. I can't imagine the challenges you're facing now. But we used to do, every month I had coffee with the CEO. And I think that's a great way if some schools are looking for just ways to open the door to communication, to have that. Now, obviously, most of us are doing it virtually these days, but again, you get it on the calendar. Sometimes you don't have very many parents show up or, guardians, but sometimes you have a lot. And I think, again, like you said, Dr. Bishop, as you build trust simply by being seen sometimes, I think that's a great opportunity. So for those schools out there, coffee with the CEO or pastries with the principal or whatever. It's virtual, but to create that door and leave it as a standing opportunity is also a great way to support staff and students and parents. I think we're going to move on next to leaning on your partners.
So Tricia, as you know, the uncertainty really not only has impacted our families around kind of economic instability, but in California, and I'm not sure, I don't know if all of our educators on here are from California, but I'll quickly describe that in California, it is the case that there are deferrals again. In times of economic instability, we lean toward deferrals. So we earn the money in a given year, but that money may be deferred as far as our receipt until the following year. And so we heard about these deferrals and we're like, gulp, we're brand new. If you know about planting a school, you know that first year is a very difficult hump to get over. Charter School Capital partnered with us even before our first year. So we were really sitting pretty and getting everything together, and then boom, March hit. And then we hear of the deferrals when the governor's budget becomes a reality. And we're like, oh, wow. And so it is really critical to lean in right now to all of your partners. Not only the charter school capitals of the world, those that provide funding for our schools. We have to lean into our parent and student partners to make sure we have those numbers so that we can earn that ADA, so we can be good partners for those who are funding us. We have to lean into our back office providers, those who help us with the business of our school. We must lean into our authorizers and our special ed individuals that help us with those things. Connection with your authorizer is critical right now. Making sure that they have confidence in the way that you're going as a school in addressing the needs of students and families. I talked about how we're leaning into families during this uncertain time. So we have developed a partnership with our county, and the counties are getting money from the state in order to address some of these things that are happening as well. So our county said, hey, Dr. Bishop, we've got LCSW social workers just waiting to do stuff. I was like, are you serious? Oh, okay. Well, we have things that they can do. They can help us find students who we feel have gone off the grid. We're not sure where they are. We think some of them moved out of state to be with grandmother or other supportive family members, but we're not quite sure. So these LCSWs are going to be helping us to find students, even if they landed somewhere outside of our charter school as far as education. That's not our concern. We just want to make sure that they're whole and that they're okay. We also have partnered with community colleges. Even though we are not considering opening right now, we're creating virtual clinics so we can do our normal visual and vision and hearing screening, but also open up for any families that might need something else, some other check on their young people in a virtual space. So we're excited about that partnership. And lastly, we have a partnership with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. If you haven't tapped into this, they have PPE coming out of their ears, and now we do. So we have masks, we have hand sanitizer, we have all the things that we need should we open. But because we haven't opened, we've done some drive-through handouts for our communities, just again, to keep that connection, to retain those students, to let people know that you care about them. So that, again, you can be a great partner for the charter school capitals of the world, those who are funding you based on your ability to maintain students, and for the other partners that I mentioned. So lean in, connect, don't lean away. As teachers, I would say lean in and connect with the adults around you, particularly the administrators, because we want to make sure, again, that what you are doing is A, educating students and raising their attainment levels, but also B, maintaining students within your charter so that you can remain whole for next year and hopefully grow in addition to that.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. I do think a couple of my thoughts on this slide is that, you know, again, my background is not in finance. I do work for a finance company, obviously Charter School Capital. And I was talking to someone the other day, an educator specifically, and I said, you know, it's not that funding or money is the most important thing in the world, but it often is the most necessary. And certainly in this challenging time, I think, you know, being aware of opportunities out there and leaning on your BOP and communicating with your authorizers about where you are financially and the support you're going to need. This is a great time to build your bridge with your authorizer, right? No one knows exactly how this is going to go. So it's an awesome opportunity to be collaborative there. You know, as far as PPE, I think that's an awesome way to support your families, right? It's hard to get it in some places. And it can be expensive. So I think that's beautiful. I also, I support At Promise students in Ohio, Indiana, Texas, and California right now. And I used to in Florida. And I have heard across the board that our At Promise students are disappearing from our schools, and not just leaving our school for another school, but actually just falling through the cracks, I think is what's happening. Parents either, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm hearing that. And so I think it's interesting that you are also having that challenge. Certainly not good for the students, but it seems to be a real challenge.
It is huge. And I, you know, one of the things that I didn't say, just because you're here, Tricia, but also I want the world to know, is that we now have a plan, like our plan to recover our students and find out where they are. We also have a plan to fund our current students, right? So I'm not confused or wondering where the money is going to come from because of these deferrals. Charter School Capital's team, under your direction and supervision, has provided us with a 1.5 year long plan where we know exactly what everything looks like, especially cash flow month to month. So, you know, under these stressful times as administrators, if there are administrators on this call, we have to put some of these things to bed so we can be whole for the work that is done for students. So I just want to appreciate you and your team for what you have done to give me that kind of mindset of, okay, the bills will be paid. Now let me move on to the next thing.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you so much. We're really honored to do such. We're coming to the end of our presentation. We're going to open it up for questions. If there are any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. I have a question while we're waiting for folks to do that, so we don't have dead airspace, but also I think it's incredibly interesting in our conversations, Dr. Bishop. And even today, you've referenced that you had a plan for re-enrolling students or finding those students, and you have a financial plan, and you had a plan to open on December 1st. And, you know, all of those things are a little in flux in terms of, or maybe they're not in flux so much as you actually are keeping them in pencil so that as things change, you can be responsive to it, right? A little nimble in responding to all of those. I'm curious, I know we're back in lockdown, but are you drafting plans for, you know, maybe next year on what that might look like just as a precaution?
Yes. So yes, we have absolutely plans for everything. We have plans for hybrid, plans for 100% in person, plans for 100% distance learning, all kinds of contingency plans that we continue to just put in front of our families as we reach these critical junctures around news from the state with regard to our county. So I think we are planning for whatever will happen and then engaging our families and staff around what that could potentially look like. One of the things, Tricia, that I did not address was technology. There was the question that we had in the chat earlier about technology. So I'd like to kind of go back to that if I might.
Right.
I think, you know, we're all kind of struggling with technology, especially our families. It was interesting when we moved to the Zoom conversations last year that I talked about. The assumption was even that families that didn't have a laptop might have a phone where the child could get on and do their work. But that became actually not a reality. And so we've just had to kind of plug along at the technology piece. What we do have is tech help immediately outside of the teacher. So whether it be myself, the principal, the deputy CEO, we are all available for real-time tech help for families so the teachers can teach. What we found at the beginning of the year was that the teachers were busy trying to tech troubleshoot, and it was getting in the way of their Zoom instruction. And so having somebody, even if it's not a full-time person, but setting up a structure where that tech support can be found outside of the classroom teacher has been critical to our success in this distance learning environment. So I would suggest such. And in addition, again, no assumptions around competency within our families. Even though many of our parents are younger, there are still issues that they face when it comes to tech. So making sure that those individuals are available for, in some cases, it's our students reaching out for support, but even for families as well.
Right. I think that, you know, I heard from a lot of my schools that the technology piece, and I'm encompassing all of that, was one of their biggest challenges. It seems to be simmering down, but I think part of the challenge was really just first, certainly last spring, was finding the funds in your budget that was likely already tight to actually be able to provide that for students. But then even this fall, because there was a scramble, some of my schools really struggled with actually, they had the money, but they couldn't spend it because they couldn't access computers or phones or hotspots because there was such a backlog of that. Did you suffer from any of that?
We suffered a little bit from that. One of the solutions we found is we actually, in some cases, did not go to brand new laptops. We went to some surplus laptops that we found. So that helped resolve kind of the finance issue and also the issue with regard to lack of supply, if you will. And so we feel like that decision, kind of to go to the surplus computers, especially those that were going homes, really helped us with regard to the supply issue.
I love that. That's like one of those light bulb moments. That's a great tip. I'm going to pass it on to all of my schools. As we continue to, you know, struggle with how we're going to distance learn. I don't know if there are other questions out there. I have another one that's really going to put you on the seat, Dr. Bishop.
Okay.
Are you having conversations about changing curriculum for the fall? You know, again, because you're distance learning now, you aren't set up to specifically forever be distance learning. We talked about this yesterday. I'm not a fan of the term new normal, but I know we're not going back. So I'm curious if there is some conversation about what things look like, not just a plan on how to actually physically do it, but what it looks like at the, you know, the very high level in terms of curriculum and educating students.
Luckily, again, we were brand new. So our curriculum providers were all pretty much connected into 21st century learning. And so they have robust portals and things that we're accessing, with the exception perhaps of one. And in that case, we have to really talk with the provider about whether or not they're going to be able to provide some of the things we need in order to be successful here. But we had the benefit and luck of being brand new. So our curriculum will continue the way it has been.
Lucky you all. I have some schools that are starting to have to rethink that and what that means. And, you know, does that actually even mean, you know, when we were talking about authorizers, do they need to get either a material revision or an amendment to their charter? And in some states, there is a stronger understanding of how that might work. In other states, no one's quite sure. So, again, lucky for you that you've already got it planned like that. For schools that don't, remember that you may have some timing issues and you may need to be working towards an amendment or a material revision as early as, well, now probably. And so reach out to your authorizer to find that out, right? Because certainly want to make sure there's strength there. Go ahead.
And I would say put some money away as well. Curriculum is very expensive right now. So starting to bank some money in case you have to make those changes.
Right, right. And I know there are free curriculum resources out there, and explore those, right?
Yes.
All right. I'll make one last call for questions just to make sure, and I promise not to pepper you and hog all my questions. Any more questions? All right. Well, Dr. Bishop, thank you so much. I'm learned so much working with you, and I'm truly honored to be part of this presentation with you.
And
thank
you.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone else for giving us your valuable time. We really appreciate it. This session has been recorded, and I understand that it will be made available to you soon. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Thank you, Tricia and Brittany. Fantastic presentation. Keep up the good work. It's a hard time to be doing this work, but it's more important than ever.
Thank you for what you all are doing as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Participants, thank you for attending this session. Be sure to fill out your session feedback. And we have one more set of sessions beginning at 11:30. And please stick around for the student experience at 12:30 in the RAPSA ballroom. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.